The ancient stone road had vanished beneath the weight of ages. Between the oak grove and the pine forest further on, the ground was merely a seamless carpet of fallen leaves, moss, and dark earth. Where once a firm path had linked the two woods, now only the hush of neglect remained. Nature had reclaimed the space, covering each slab and every contour with a thick shroud of forgetting. Only in one small stretch, near the roots of a larger tree, did the tip of a gray stone emerge, a quiet reminder of what lay beneath. Maybe this is just another one of those quiet stories, made to help you relax. And sometimes that's all we really need. Matias paused at the edge of the first grove and gazed at that single visible stone. The morning air was crisp, carrying the scent of dew-kissed earth and damp bark. He wore heavy boots and soft leather gloves, softened by years of use. In his hands, he held a wooden rake and a straight shovel. He walked to the solitary stone, knelt, and touched its cool surface with his fingertips. The rock was solid, unyielding. Matias' resolve hardened. He would not let the path remain lost. He would bring the road back into the light, stone by stone, until the two woods were once more connected. The task's quiet promise was simple and clear. By the end of that day, the ground would again offer sure footing. The crossing would cease to be a treacherous tangle of hidden roots and unseen hollows, transforming into a steadfast line, guiding anyone who needed to journey from one side to the other. Matias took a deep breath, feeling the cold air fill his lungs. The wind drifted slowly through the high canopies of the oaks, making the leaves whisper a continuous, gentle sigh. He planted his shovel in the soft earth beside the path and gripped the rake with both hands. The wooden handle was smooth and nestled perfectly in his palm. Matias took his first step into the overgrown stretch. He set the rake's tines on the ground just behind the gray stone and pulled it towards him. The movement was firm yet unhurried. A thick layer of brown leaves and thin branches yielded, tumbling back. Beneath that first dry covering lay another layer, damper and darker, made of leaves already melting back into the earth. He repeated the gesture. He pulled the rake once more, feeling the accumulated weight of the material. This time, the wooden tines scraped against something hard. The sound was muffled but unmistakable. It was the sound of stone. Matias pushed aside the mound of damp leaves with his boot, revealing a second slab, perfectly aligned with the first. The stone was earth-stained, yet whole. A small ant scurried, disoriented, across the newly discovered surface, quickly finding refuge in a tiny crevice. The morning sunlight began to dapple through the branches, creating golden patches on the forest floor. Matias looked ahead. The stretch he needed to clear extended for dozens of yards, curving gently to the left before disappearing into the shadows of the distant pines. It was a long task, demanding repetition and patience. No shortcuts to be found. Every inch of earth needed to be moved with care so as not to damage what lay beneath. He adjusted the gloves on his hands, steadied his feet, and settled his body into the day's rhythm. The surrounding grove seemed to watch in quiet observance, accompanying the beginning of the transformation. The sound of the rake scraping against stone became the steady heartbeat of the grove. Matias advanced in short steps, pulling the accumulation of years to the sides of the path. The work revealed the anatomy of forgetting. The upper layer was light and crackled, full of sun-twisted oak leaves and dry branches that broke easily. When he dragged this part, the wind helped, carrying the lighter pieces away. But just beneath, the reality was denser. The lower layer demanded continuous strength. It was damp, dark, and heavy compound. The leaves there were glued together by the rains of many seasons. Matias dug in the rake and pulled, feeling the resistance of the wet earth. The scent that rose was deep and rich, the pure aroma of fertile soil and humus. It was a smell that recalled ancient roots and cool shade. As he cleared away this dark mass, the shape of the road began to emerge with clarity. It was not a path of small, loose stones. These were large, irregular slabs, yet fitted together with a clear purpose. Some were almost rectangular, others had rounded edges, but all formed a flat, continuous puzzle. The color of the rocks varied. Some were a pale gray, almost white under the sunlight. Others leaned towards a leaden hue, darkened by constant moisture. Matias paused from time to time to push the mound of debris away from the edge, creating small hills of leaves and earth that would soon be absorbed by the forest. The effort warmed his arms and shoulders. The cold morning air no longer bothered him. He took off his thick coat, folded it, and placed it on a fallen log nearby. He remained in just a flannel shirt, which allowed for more freedom of movement. The wind touched his face, bringing immediate relief. He returned to work, finding a rhythm that didn't tire him, a cadence his body accepted naturally. Pull, drag, push aside, advance one step, repeat. At one point, the rake snagged. Matias didn't force it. He released the tool and knelt on the ground. There was a thick, partially rotten branch lay across the stones and buried in the mud. With his hands protected by the leather gloves, he gripped the branch in the middle. The wood yielded slightly under the pressure of his fingers, soft and spongy. He pulled firmly. The branch detached from the earth with a sucking sound, revealing a clear line of clean stone where it had rested for so long. Small white insects scattered quickly, fleeing the sudden light. Matias lifted the branch and gently tossed it into the midst of the trees. He picked up the rake again and cleared the earth that had remained under the dead wood. 2 more slabs appeared, perfectly flat. The path now had a visible extension. Looking back, Matias could see a strip of clear stone cutting through the sea of brown leaves. It was a beautiful and comforting contrast. The road seemed to breathe, relieved of the weight that had suffocated it. The sun slowly climbed the sky, and the light passing through the leaves shifted from a pale gold to a vibrant yellow, warming the newly discovered stones. With each conquered yard, the sense of progress accumulated. It wasn't a sudden change, but a slow revelation. The sound of birds accompanied the rhythm of his work. A sharp, short song came from the highest canopies, answered by a soft trill somewhere closer to the ground. Matias felt a light sweat on his forehead. He continued to advance, guided by the line of stones, letting the road's shape dictate the direction of his steps. The surface was clear, but the edges still held their own obstacles. The central part of the path was exposed, but the sides seemed to struggle to reclaim lost ground. Over the years, the undergrowth had advanced unchecked. Thick ferns leaned over the stones, and thin roots crossed the slabs like coarse spider webs, seeking earth on the other side. Matias leaned the rake against a tree and picked up a smaller tool. It was a curved blade with a short, ergonomic wooden handle, perfect for precise cuts close to the ground. He knelt at the edge of the path, feeling the hardness of the stone beneath his knees, and began to work on the right margin. He held a handful of ivy that encroached upon the slab. The leaves were deep green, shiny and firm. With his other hand, he ran the blade at the base of the stems where they met the earth. The cut was clean and produced a dry snap. Matias pulled the mass of leaves, and the root yielded, detaching from the stone with a slight tearing sound. As he removed the plant, he revealed the straight edge of the slab. The difference was immediate. The road gained contour, gaining a clear boundary that separated it from the organic chaos of the forest. He advanced on his knees, cutting and pulling. The scent of green, fresh sap filled the air, a sharp aroma that contrasted with the heavy smell of damp earth. Some roots were more stubborn. They had grown into the small gaps between the lateral slabs, thickening over time and pushing the earth upwards. For these, Matias used the tip of the blade to loosen the surrounding soil before pulling. When the root finally came out, it brought with it a small clod of dark earth, leaving the gap clean and empty. The work demanded focus in his hands. He felt the rough texture of dry stems, the softness of new leaves, and the constant coolness of the stone. Each plant removed was a small visual relief. The edge of the path emerged, drawing a continuous line that snaked gently through the terrain. Where before there had been only a confused transition between stone and brush, now there was order. The road showed its true width, spacious enough for two people to walk side by side without touching the branches at the sides. After clearing a long stretch of the right margin, Matias stood up, stretched his back, and moved to the other side. The left margin was dominated by clumps of tall, pale grass, whose thin blades curved over the stone, creating a curtain that hid the ground. He grasped the clumps near the root and used the blade in a swift motion, cutting the grass close to the soil. The sound of the cut was soft, like the tearing of thick fabric. He gathered the bundles of cut grass and neatly deposited them at the foot of a nearby oak. The sun was already high, almost directly overhead. The light fell straight through the openings in the tree canopy, illuminating the fine dust that rose with the movement of the plants. The air was warmer, and the silence of the grove seemed deeper, interrupted only by the rhythmic sound of Matias's work. The cut, the pull, the discard. Gradually, the entire road gained a frame. The gray stones now stood out clearly against the dark green of the leaves and the brown of the earth at the sides. The path not only existed again, it displayed its original form, with sharp edges that guided the eye towards the interior of the second grove. With its surface clean and edges defined, the road revealed its true condition. Most of the stones had withstood time well, remaining firm and level. However, the forest floor is alive and constantly in motion. Thick roots grow and push the earth. Heavy rains wash away foundations, and winter ice expands and contracts the ground. As he walked along the newly discovered stretch, Matias felt the ground yield slightly under his boot. He stopped and looked down. There was a rectangular stone, larger than the others, that was tilted. One of its corners had sunk into the soft earth, while the opposite side rose above the path's level, creating a dangerous step. When he stepped on it, the rock wobbled with a dull thud, knocking against its neighbor. A safe road cannot have loose stones. Matias went to where he had left his tools and brought a heavy iron bar with one end flattened and a canvas bucket containing coarse sand and pebbles that he had prepared earlier. He approached the loose stone and assessed the situation. The gap between it and the other rocks was filled with dark mud and thin roots that offered no real support. He inserted the flattened end of the iron bar into the widest crevice, right at the point where the stone had sunk. Holding the bar with both hands, he levered it, using the edge of the neighboring stone as a fulcrum. The stone's weight was considerable. Matias tensed his muscles in his arms and legs, pushing the bar down. The stone resisted for a second, held by the vacuum of the mud, and then yielded with a wet sound. It slowly rose. Matias slid a thick branch under it to keep it lifted and removed the iron bar. With his gloved hands, he tilted the heavy slab to the side, letting it rest outside the hole. The revealed space was a cavity of black, pasty earth. Water from past rains had accumulated there, softening the base until it could no longer support the stone's weight. Matias took a small hand shovel and began to scrape away the soft mud. He dug until he found firm, dry earth, removing all the unstable material. The smell of damp minerals rose from the newly cleaned hole. Next, he pulled the canvas bucket. With cupped hands, he scooped handfuls of coarse sand mixed with small stones and poured them into the bottom of the cavity. The sand fell with a rough, dry sound. He spread the material evenly, creating a level and firm bed. He pressed the sand with his hands, ensuring there were no empty spaces. He added a little more in the corner that used to sink, compensating for the terrain's slope. It was time to return the stone to its place. Matias held the slab by its sides. The surface was rough and scratched the leather of his gloves. He lifted it with concentrated effort, feeling the dense weight in the center of his body, and guided it back into the hole. He lowered the slab slowly, avoiding trapping his fingers. The rock settled onto the bed of sand with a heavy, definitive sound, a solid impact that did not reverberate. Matias stood up and stepped on the stone. He put his full weight on it. The ground did not move. He swayed his body, trying to force some unevenness, but the rock was perfectly settled, level with its neighbors. The unstable, hollow sound had disappeared, replaced by the silent firmness of a job well done. He repeated this process 3 more times along the path, finding stones that had come loose or sunk over time. Each rock lifted, each hole cleaned and filled with new sand, restored the road's structural integrity. The physical effort was great, and Matias's breathing was deep and measured. His gloves became covered in gray dust and black earth. When the last stone was fixed, he walked from end to end along the restored stretch. His steps echoed uniformly. There were no more stumbles, no more wobbles. The road was solid, ready to bear the weight of any traveler, as it had been on the day it was built. The path's structure was perfect, firm and well-defined, but the surface of the stones still bore the marks of time. A thin layer of dry earth, dust, and crumbled leaf debris covered the slabs, leaving everything with a dull, opaque appearance. The true color of the road remained hidden beneath this veil of accumulated grime. Matias picked up a rustic broom, made with thin, stiff branches tied firmly to a long wooden handle. He positioned himself at the beginning of the path and began to sweep. The movement was broad and methodical. He dragged the broom from left to right, pushing the fine dust towards the edge of the grove. The sound of the dry branches scraping against the stone was harsh, like a constant murmur accompanying his slow steps. With each pass, a small cloud of dust rose into the air and slowly descended, carried by the light breeze that blew through the tree trunks.
As he swept, he felt the texture of the ground change. Where before his boot had slipped lightly over loose earth, now it met the clean grip of the rock. He advanced along the path, cleaning every crevice, removing the dust accumulated in the small natural depressions of the slabs. The work was light compared to the effort of lifting the stones, allowing his muscles to relax a little. As he swept the last stretch, the light in the grove began to shift. The sun, which had shone intensely, was covered by a blanket of gray clouds that spread silently across the sky. These were not storm clouds, heavy and dark, but rather a soft, slate-colored covering that transformed the daylight into a diffuse, shadowless clarity. The wind stopped completely. The leaves on the trees became still. And then it began. The first drop fell on a clean stone, leaving a round, dark mark. Then another, a little further ahead. In a few seconds, a very fine, steady rain began to fall over the grove. It was a gentle drizzle, whose drops were so small they seemed to float before touching the ground. Matias stopped sweeping and stepped back a few paces, sheltering under the dense canopy of a large oak. He leaned against the rough trunk and watched. The rain made no loud noise, just a soft hiss as it touched the thousands of leaves around him. The smell of the forest changed instantly. The dry aroma of dust gave way to the unmistakable perfume of wet earth and damp stone, a fresh and purifying scent that filled the air. He watched the road react to the water. The fine drizzles settled the dust that still lingered in the air and began to wash the surface of the stones. As the water covered the slabs, the true nature of the path revealed itself. The fine dust turned into thin mud and flowed into the crevices, leaving the rock surface clean and shining. The colors, once mudded, came to life. Matias could see that the stones were not all alike. There were slabs of silvery blue, reflecting the soft light of the cloudy sky. Others had veins of dark green, the color of ancient moss embedded in the rock itself. Some smaller stones had white specks that sparkled under the thin layer of water. The wet road looked like a river of calm stones cutting through the forest. The contrast between the clean, shining path and the dark edges of the wet earth was absolute. The rain lasted as long as necessary. It washed the leaves, cleared the air, and purified the path. Gradually, the drizzle lessened until it stopped completely. The silence that followed was damp and tranquil, broken only by the occasional sound of a heavy drop falling from a high leaf and hitting the ground. The sun began to reappear through gaps in the clouds, casting oblique rays of light that made the wet path shimmer. The road was clean, washed by the grove itself, breathing a sigh of relief after so many years covered by the earth. The path now gleamed, clean and level for almost its entire length. Only one stretch remained. Exactly at the midpoint between the oak grove and the pine forest, the terrain curved slightly and descended, forming a small natural depression. It was the lowest point of the crossing. And there, the problem was different. Water from past rains with nowhere to drain had accumulated at the bottom of this basin. The stones in this section were not just covered with leaves, but submerged in a thick layer of slippery, dark mud. A murky puddle rested on the road, stagnant, blocking passage. The slabs at the bottom were invisible. If anyone tried to cross there, their boots would sink into the mud and slip on the hidden stones. The road was interrupted.
Matias walked to the edge of the puddle. He didn't try to clear the mud immediately, knowing that the water would accumulate again with the next rain. The road needed permanent relief. He looked at the sides of the path. The terrain to the right rose towards a gentle hill, but the terrain to the left continued to descend slowly among the trees. That's where the water should go. He picked up the straight shovel. The wooden handle was cool and slightly damp. Matias stepped off the stone road onto the left margin and plunged the metal blade into the soft earth, a few inches from the stagnant puddle. He pushed the shovel with his boot, cutting through the dark soil full of fine roots. The sound of metal tearing through the wet earth was dense and satisfying. He lifted a square of earth and deposited it further ahead among the trees. He began to dig a small channel, a narrow, shallow ditch that started from the edge of the road and moved away towards the lower part of the groove. With each shovel of earth removed, the path for the water became clearer. He dug with constant movements, keeping the bottom of the channel sloped to ensure gravity did its work. The smell of fresh clay rose strongly with each turned piece of soil. When the channel reached about 2 meters in length, moving far enough from the road, Matias returned to the starting point near the puddle. All that remained was to break the last barrier of earth that held the accumulated water over the stones. He positioned the shovel and cut through this small natural dike. The reaction was immediate. The muddy water found its escape. With a continuous liquid murmur, the puddle began to drain. The dark water flowed into the newly dug channel, running cheerfully among the roots and disappearing into the porous forest of the distant forest. Matias watched the water level drop rapidly. Where before there had been an opaque mirror, the shapes of the submerged stones began to emerge. When the water stopped flowing, only a layer of thick mud remained on the slabs at the bottom. He took the broom of stiff branches and, taking advantage of the moisture, swept the mud forcefully towards the edge, pushing it off the path. The mud yielded, thick and heavy, finally revealing the central stones of the depression. They were the largest of all the road, great rectangular blocks designed precisely to support the point of greatest tension in the terrain. He used his boot to scrape the last traces of mud from the gaps between the stones. The depression was now clean. The water had its own path to follow, and the road was free. There were no more puddles, no slippery mud, no interruptions. The continuous stretch of gray stone extended from the roots of the oaks, descended through the gentle curve, and rose again, merging with the welcoming shadow of the pines. The structural work was complete. The wound in the grove had been closed. The afternoon sun began its descent, shifting the tone of the light filtering through the leaves. The gold deepened, almost orange, casting long, soft shadows along the forest floor. Matias gathered his tools. He wiped the shovel blade on the grass, dusted the rake handle, and placed the iron bar beside the empty canvas bucket. He left everything organized near the large oak where he had sheltered from the rain hours earlier. He removed his leather gloves. His hands were warm, marked by continuous effort, his skin feeling the cool, open air after a full day confined. He rubbed his palms together and walked back to the exact spot where he had started that morning, the boundary of the first grove.
Matias stopped and looked ahead. The transformation was silent, yet complete. Where before there had been only a continuous, confused carpet of dead leaves and neglect, now lay a ribbon of clean, clear, and intentional stone. The road seemed to belong to that place, not as an invasion, but as an ancient, respectful agreement between stone and earth. The edges were perfectly delineated, separating the order of the path from the wild growth of the woods. The stones, washed by the drizzle and dried by the afternoon breeze, displayed their shades of gray, blue, and moss green with quiet pride. He took the first step. The sole of his leather boot met the flat surface of the first slab. The sound was firm, a dry, comforting thud. There was no crackle of breaking dry branches, nor the soft, uncertain sink into hidden mud. There was only the solid, immediate response of the rock. Matias began to walk. He was in no hurry. Each step was a confirmation of work well done. He felt the absolute stability of the ground. The weight of his body was received by a base that did not yield, did not wobble, and did not slip. The sound of his own footsteps created a new rhythm in the grove. It was the sound of return, the sound of use. The road was alive again because it was being walked upon. He followed the gentle curve the path made as it wound around the exposed root of a centuries-old tree. The road respected the terrain, flowing gracefully around natural obstacles. He noticed how the temperature seemed to shift slightly as he advanced. The air near the clean ground was cooler, free from the heat generated by the decomposition of piled leaves. He reached the midpoint, the small natural basin that had once held the stagnant puddle. He descended the slight incline. His steps echoed a little more gravely on the larger slabs. The ground there was perfectly dry. He looked to his left and saw the small channel he had dug. The surrounding earth was damp, but the water had already been completely absorbed by the forest. The solution was simple, invisible to anyone merely passing by, but essential for the path's survival. Matias continued to ascend the slight rise on the other side of the basin. The scent of oak was gradually replaced by the sharp, clean aroma of pine resin. The ground around the road changed from broad brown leaves to thin needles and dry pine cones. The transition between the two groves happened naturally, and the road was the thread that stitched these two worlds together. As he walked, he didn't dwell on the effort he had made. The slight ache in his shoulders and the tiredness in his legs seemed distant. His mind was focused only on the sensation of walking, on the firmness of the stone beneath his feet, and on the clarity of the path. There was no need to constantly look down to avoid stumbling. He could keep his head high, observing the tall trunks, feeling the breeze on his face, fully trusting the ground that supported him. The connection was remade. Matias reached the end of the path. The last stone slab met the firm earth of the pine forest, blending smoothly with the needle-covered ground. He stepped beyond the road into the soft earth and paused. The crossing was complete. He didn't turn back immediately. Instead, he walked to a tall, robust pine tree that grew near the path's edge. Its trunk was straight, covered with thick, fragmented bark that smelled of dry sap. Matias leaned his left shoulder against the tree, crossed his arms over his chest, and let his body's weight rest against the firm wood. He exhaled slowly and deeply, feeling a profound relaxation wash over his tired muscles.
From there, he had a perfect view of the entire length of the path he had just traversed. The road unfolded before him, a clear line of stone cutting through the shadows of the trees and disappearing into the distant curve towards the oaks. The sun finally dipped below the tree line. The grove lost its direct light, plunging into the soft, bluish clarity of twilight. In this late afternoon light, the stones seemed to absorb the last of the day's brightness. The path glowed faintly in the approaching dark, like a pale ribbon guiding the eye through the forest. The night wind began to blow, colder and steadier, passing through the tops of the pines with a sound reminiscent of distant ocean waves. Matias remained in silence, simply observing. There was nothing more to be done, no leaf to be moved, no stone to be adjusted. The road was there, still, patient, and complete. It asked no haste. It knew how to wait. It would withstand the next rain, the falling leaves of autumn, and the cold of winter. It was ready for whoever might need it, today or many years from now. He felt the scent of night rising from the cold earth. Gradually, the shadows swallowed the details of the trees, leaving only the large, dark forms of the trunks. But the path remained visible, a secure presence in the midst of the woods. Matias closed his eyes for a moment, listening to the wind and the calm breath of the grove. The work was finished. Balance had returned. He pushed off the tree, adjusted the collar of his shirt, and began to walk back, slowly and silently, guided by the firmness of the stone beneath his feet.